You're watching Rogers TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson, the personal finance show focused on moving you forward financially. On today's show, we're talking about the finances of younger Canadians. Are you from Generation Z or a millennial looking to set yourself up for long-lasting success with money? Or are you the parent of one of these kids looking for advice to share with your child? If so, our guest today is an expert. He is a personal finance creator. His podcast, called The New Money, is heard across the country and around the globe. He offers engaging, all-encompassing personal finance tips on investing, credit cards, debt, real estate, budgeting, and general financial literacy. His social media content has been viewed by more than 46 million people and continues to grow. Nate Kennedy, welcome to Money Matters, and thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get into our discussion, can you share with us a little bit about your background and how you came into the world of personal finance?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know what, growing up, I didn't have too much. We were very humble, but one thing my parents definitely instilled in me was the value of a dollar. And so I felt like I had that sort of concept throughout my life. And so I eventually wanted to go to school to become a doctor, which didn't end up panning out. And pretty quickly, I switched into business and studied finance and marketing in school, and just quickly fell in love with it. But one thing I did realize is that they teach you a lot about like corporate finance and accounting, but they don't actually teach you how to, balance your own, your own checkbook or your own budget. And so I kind of took a deep dive into that. And when I realized I wasn't very financially literate at all, and just became an absolute fanatic, and just studied every last thing, read every last book, took every course I could at school. And so eventually I graduated and I was working corporate, but I started the podcast, I think in 2018 or 2019, just sharing some of the stuff I was learning along the way. And eventually that started to scale and grow and grow. And I realized that a lot of people do want to learn these things. And eventually that ended up turning into my career. And so here I am making personal finance content.
So you're definitely going to be an expert in this because you have that firsthand knowledge of going through this. So getting into what we're sort of talking about today, we know that the economic climate right now has left many people struggling, especially our younger Canadians. Our recent BDO Debt Solutions survey with CPA Canada showed that Canadians, including many here in Ontario, have been under pressure financially since the Bank of Canada introduced the record rate increases between March of 2022 up to July of 2023, when, of course, the key lending rate went from 0.25% all the way up to 5%. Now, we have seen some rate reductions, but many are thinking that we need more of these rate reductions before any kind of relief is maybe felt. And many are still feeling that impact of these higher rates. That survey said that 48% of Canadians say that they have been negatively impacted by those rate increases, and 17% have said that they are very negatively impacted. And when we look at the demographics of those that answered that poll, 50% of those between ages 18 to 34 were impacted negatively, and 58% of those between ages 35 to 54. And of course, there's been a couple reports as well from TransUnion and Equifax reporting the same type of trend. Younger Canadians are feeling more of the pressure than perhaps older Canadians who are maybe 55 years and older. And younger Canadians are servicing or shouldering the majority of the consumer debt that the country has. So, Nate, when you hear these kinds of statistics, why do you think that younger Canadians are feeling the pinch more than older Canadians?
Well, I would say it's a lot of these things are very much second and third order effects, right? Obviously, with the central bank having to hike rates across the world, all central banks were doing that because there's an inflation problem, and that was certainly a problem. And eventually, Canada, the United States, and other countries kind of got that under control, and now we're looking towards cutting rates. But when you raise rates that much, you not only really affect the housing market. It pretty much came to a halt, like pricing just basically fell off of a cliff. But more so, it slows down economic activity, and that affects the job market a lot. And so a lot of mid to higher tier, like white collar jobs have been, doing rifts and layoffs and things like that. And the job market's gotten a lot tougher. And as a result, just because of CFOs and executives like forecasting and preparing for a rainy day, they have to reduce their workforce, things like that. And that tends to affect younger, folks who are just trying to establish themselves more, because usually they're included in those sort of like layoffs or are less desirable in the job market, let's say, than somebody who's maybe more senior and has more skill set and things like that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's affecting younger Canadians, because they might not have that career capital built up yet, and that's sort of trickling down into their finances and having to stretch their money further and further, take on alternative financing like credit cards and personal loans and things that maybe aren't too great in terms of, to say the least, in terms of financing options. And they're going to continue to cut rates. I know they're cutting rates very shortly. And that, personally, I'm feeling very optimistic about that, because typically economic activity increases after that. So there's a lot, the clouds are starting to go away, so to speak. And I think there's a good amount of opportunity. I think there's going to be more hiring, and hopefully that, buoyancy and increasing income could certainly help Canadians deal with the sort of lingering effects of inflation.
Well, and so research is showing that the contributing factor, one of them, with the struggles that younger Canadians are feeling, is that lack of financial literacy. And you touched on this in your introduction about how there's a disconnect, it feels like, for young people in particular, about getting that knowledge of managing our personal finances. Now, this is your wheelhouse. What's your advice for those viewers who are looking to grow their financial literacy?
I certainly think that the number one source right now is online. There's a wealth of information that you can find online. The problem with that is that there's good information and there's bad information. And typically, a good heuristic you can think about is this person telling me that I can get rich fast or I can get rich slow? If they're saying you can get rich slow, then you might want to be, listening in. And if they're saying you can get rich fast, you might want to be very dubious of what they're saying. But typically, you can learn a lot through YouTube, and a lot of these institutions now have so many different resources where they can tell you pretty much everything. It all comes downstream of spend less than you earn and invest the difference. That's what I always say. And then everything in personal finance sort of follows that. But typically, the first exercise that I did, and I tell people to always do, is to not type out, not to create an Excel spreadsheet, but like physically write out how much you make and each expense, that every single one that comes to mind. And then you go and review the past maybe 2-3 months of your billing statement. And I know it's painful, but just write out to get a picture of your personal P&L. Like, what are you spending money on? Where is it going? And then things become a lot more clear, and then you can actually make a plan for yourself. And it doesn't need to necessarily be I don't think of it as a budget as much as you're making a financial plan for yourself, right? Like, just rebrand it, because I know there's a lot of weight around a budget and it's heavy and things like that. So you're creating a financial plan to better yourself, right? Think of yourself as a CEO, whatever it takes for you to re-picture that in your mind. And it's a quick exercise that you can do. And very quickly, this will kind of inform your spending. You can input it in some sort of software, like, I know Mint is not around anymore, but you need a budget, or it could be Excel or something online, even Google Sheets, whatever, just so it's there. And then you can have an eye on it. And then you can start to track those sort of changes over time. I find that exercise is it's not even necessarily the numbers, but it's more the cathartic sort of release of like, okay, all the stuff that's on my brain, like psychologically, is on this page and I can see it, and things become a lot more clear. So I love that exercise, and I really think it level sets a lot of folks when they start to take their money more seriously.
I completely agree with you there's something about that word budget that makes people shut down.
Yeah.
and however you want to call it, it's your plan, it's your future, it's however you want to visualize that. But I agree that physically writing it, absolutely important. And then in addition to that, once you've got the plan set, tracking as you go, because you'll see, like you say, that exercise of seeing where your money is going, it's going to have so much more beneficial results for you as you move forward. And of course, there's that saying that if you don't tell your money where to go, you're going to wonder where it went.
Yes.
And that's the feeling that we all get is, I know I'm earning money, but where is it going every month? And we can answer that questions for ourselves by doing that exercise. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And so, of course, having that plan in place is that critical tool. Now, in our digital world, it's hard to maybe stick to that plan. According to statistics, our use of social media is very high. 95% of millennials use social media, and 86% of us do that on a daily basis. So we're constantly seeing this inundation of somebody being successful, somebody, keeping up with the Joneses, all of those things, that fear of missing out that we see other people seemingly participating in. What's your advice for those who are maybe managing that comparison that they see online?
It's really tough. You have to remind yourself that there's a thing called Photoshop. There's a thing called editors. There's a thing where people can rent a private jet studio. It's a building that they can go to, and it's sort of like a set. And influencers and things of the like will take pictures there and videos and sip champagne, and then they'll leave the set, and then that's off bay and whatever. It's quite a crazy scene. You almost can't take any of it too seriously. And ultimately, the only person you can really compare yourself to is yourself. I know that's sort of trite or cliche or whatever you want to call it, but it's really, really true. I think if you're able to just compare yourself to who you were last year and try to beat that person and compete with them ruthlessly, and you do that year after year after year, you will be more successful and more, wealthy than you could ever imagine if you're just making those compound changes over time. And so, think about who you were last year, where you were from a financial perspective, and just compete really, really hard with that person. And I think that's a more healthy, competitive way to sort of beat it, right? Because that's the only person that's actually going to match up to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. Having that comparison of where you were a year ago to where you want to be, sometime in the future, I think is really important. Now, you mentioned earlier, just a little bit, we only have a little bit of time left, but you mentioned earlier about who we should be listening to when we're looking on social media and things like that. Are there any sort of credentials maybe that we should be looking at when we're listening to these influencers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly you want to look for that. There are, like myself, I'm in the process of getting more credentialed because of that very reason. Looking for CFPs and CFAs, people who work in finance that not only work in finance, because here's the thing, if just because they work in finance doesn't mean we're good with money, but looking at advisors and seeing what they've done. And then you really do have to take the information at face value of what they're saying. The credentials are sort of like table stakes, and then it's like, what are they actually saying, and how does that track against what you've sort of learned in your information? And so you certainly should be trying to size them up. And if they don't have credentials, really judging the content of what they're saying. That's generally how you should go about it.
Yeah, I agree. And so if you're finding yourself to be one of those people who is short on money month after month, maybe one option that you might be looking at is considering a side hustle. And that's something that younger Canadians are opting to do more and more in this type of demographic. So what side hustles are best, and how do you get started? And Nate's going to have some great advice for you when Money Matters returns.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
With clubs, leagues, and courts in every province and territory across Canada, squash is the sport for wall-to-wall fun, fitness, and friendship. From coast to coast to coast. Learn to play, and you'll want to do it every day. Squash. Play inside the box.
With Rogers TV, you can cheer on the home team from the comfort of your living room. We'll head to the rink, the field, the court, or the pitch, so you don't have to. Tune in and cheer on your local amateur athletes on Rogers TV.
Welcome back to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson. My guest today is Nate Kennedy, personal finance creator and host of the New Money podcast. And today's focus is financial advice for young people. If you are from Generation Z, a millennial, or the parent of one of those, this show is for you. We know many Canadians are struggling financially these days. Inflation, higher interest rates, they continue to take their toll on finances of many people. And surveys are showing that younger Canadians are struggling the most to try to keep up. So if you can relate, one way to offset your expenses and perhaps make ends meet is taking on a side hustle. Surveys show that more workers are taking on side jobs due to the rising rental rates, inflation, grocery costs, of course, and other economic factors. Last year in 2023, 28% of Canadians of all ages took on a side hustle, and that's a 13% increase from 2022. And it's something that even more younger Canadians are opting to do. There was a recent poll that found that 84% of Canadian Gen Z small business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs are driven to start side hustles. So, Nate, 84% is a large number. Does that surprise you that so many young people are considering this?
No, not at all. I mean, obviously, we just talked about how the cost of living is quite high, and folks are looking for more dollars. And the thing is, and I say this a lot, is you can only save so much money, but how much you can make is technically infinite, right? So I do think it's great. And I remember when I was in university, man, I was working like 2-3 jobs. I had like 2 or 3 side hustles. Like I was just doing anything to make ends meet and put myself ahead and hit my sort of numbers for the summers before I would go back to school. So I think it's fantastic, and it builds a sort of muscle that I think has served me well over the past few years. And that extra income certainly provides a lot of relief. I think side hustles, for me, it's a very common term now, and it gets applied to a lot of different things. I think when you're thinking of a side hustle, I think you should be putting your time towards something where perhaps you're building a skill, and it could eventually be scalable. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of side hustles that you'll see where it's just like, hey, like take these surveys online, or like do this one quick thing and you can make a little bit of money here. And I think generally, that's not the best use of your time. You should maybe look for these different opportunities. Maybe it's adjacent to your work. Maybe it's, let's say, from a professional standpoint, it's extra consulting, and you're helping and maybe doing some freelancing. Or maybe it's something where it could be scalable. Like it's maybe, let's say, I don't know, a cleaning business, but you could start to hire cleaners over time, and then you have a sort of like broader thing, and it could eventually be a full-time thing if you really wanted to. You ask yourself, does this thing that I'm putting my time towards, does it have the scalability to be something full-time, or, realize like real money that could, one day, it doesn't have to, but one day it could take over my full-time income, right? Finding those kinds of side hustles I find are the most worthwhile. And then once you get those going and you have a little bit of a system, it certainly becomes a business, and you really do feel the benefits of the income, as opposed to sort of one-off side hustles here and there, but nothing's really compounding from a skills perspective.
Do you have any advice for those who are doing that side hustle business on managing the money that they're earning from that side business?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously, it depends how much money they're making. I think what a lot of people do when they're starting out, that, if they're making good money, and it's a good problem to have, is they're not too thoughtful about when they incorporate. And I think that would be a great question for a CPA to ask, like, hey, this is the amount of money I'm making. Maybe you're not using all of it. Does it make sense to, put it within a corporation that would, at a lower tax rate, and maybe you're able to defer the money over time? We can't sit here and say if that's the right decision for anybody. That's more so the job of a CPA, or even a tax lawyer, more so a CPA. But I do find that a lot of people who do have these side hustles are paying at their marginal rates this extra money that they're not even really spending, or maybe it's a very profitable side hustle. Maybe it could make sense for them to shelter some of those gains. But I would probably talk to a CPA about that question, and you might find it might be worth doing.
And what about investing? Because we always say that investing is a smart thing to do because it can help you to set you up sort of for future success. And of course, when you're able to do that at a younger age, then the payout can be a little bit more beneficial. What is your advice on the investing side? Is there a way that or something that younger viewers can be doing now to help to sort of secure that future for themselves?
Yeah, you know what? It's absolutely. There's a number of tax deferred vehicles that you can use. Obviously, a TFSA, RSP, RESP, the first home savings account now, all awesome vehicles that you can get started with. I always say start with the TFSA because it's just the most simple and bare bones. There aren't huge different tax implications and lockups like it is with an RSP. So if you're just getting started with investing, open up your TFSA. Wealth Simple is fantastic. Questrade's great. And a lot of the major banks have really stepped up their game with their brokerages as well. Some of their fees aren't the greatest, but they're certainly a lot better than they used to be because of the pressure from something like a Wealth Simple trade. I really love just that idea of just getting started and building that muscle and just putting whatever you can, starting with $100, $200, and then working your way up to, a few $100 a month that's automatically deducted off your paycheck as if it was a bill, right? So you pay your utilities, that's always going to get paid. Your mortgage is always going to get paid, rent or, your bill, you got to eat your grocery, but you should be getting paid yourself. You should be paying yourself first as well, right? So, if you're able to get into that rhythm and then the money just comes off automated, you don't have anything to do with it. I think that is when you're really going to start to see the benefits of the compounding occur. But there's just such ease now versus 20, 30, 40 years ago when you had to have a broker and it was a very complicated sort of setup process and there's minimum buys and you had to bring a certain amount of money to the table. Now you can start with as little as $1, like literally you could open it today, TFSA, everything done and over with, instantly invest. And so the friction is a lot less and it just takes a little bit of curiosity to get started.
Are there some common mistakes that young people make when they're just starting out in the investments?
I typically think that they think that investing is this big, scary thing, which it certainly can be. And they think that they need to be stock pickers and they need to be, these Wall Street geniuses, which absolutely is not the case. I'm a huge fan of index funds and exchange traded funds. These are products that have hundreds or thousands of companies all in one. So it takes the choice out of it for you, and you basically just invest in the market that you're choosing. So if it's a US ETF or index fund, you're investing in the biggest and best US companies, right? If it's a global one, you're investing in the biggest companies in the world, and that way you don't necessarily need to stock pick or change. All you have to worry about is making sure you're putting the capital away.
Now, of course, buying a home is one of those other things that young people are hoping to plan to do. And it's that hot topic that many people are talking about, getting into the market for the first time, buying their first home. Some are even worrying that they're not going to be able to even buy their own home at one day because getting that down payment has been really challenging. Other people perhaps are turning to mom and dad for help. So Nate, what are your thoughts about buying that first home? Do you have any advice for those first-time buyers?
Yeah, you know what? I have very strong opinions that get stronger by the day on this very topic. I typically think that a lot of young folks right now, you could argue they got into everybody always says get into the housing market as soon as you can. I know personally a lot of young adults that got in when they were 22, 23, 24, right after 2020 and everything that happened. And they had a variable rate mortgage and they didn't really understand and they weren't in the greatest financial position, but they were, putting money more than asking and there were no conditions, no terms, whatever. And then this thing called, interest rates spiked. And now, there's a lot that not only struggled with their mortgage, but they had to move out. They had to move back home with their parents and rent out their place because they weren't in the financial position strong enough to actually withstand, being a homeowner. I think a lot of folks think that, owning a home is an asset and, there's no cost to it. There's no nothing. It's just a good thing. And you should just swallow everything because it's, in service of this great amount of money that you're going to get that similar to your grandparents where they bought a home for 10 grand and now it's like worth $1 million or whatever. That's the animal spirits come out and everybody knows those kinds of stories. We're not in that sort of realm anymore. It's a lot different. I look at home ownership as more of a consumption good than an asset. And I think you should be in a pretty strong financial position before doing that. And so you can be able to absorb those costs that come with it. Now, if you do get a little bit of upside and you build some equity, that's great. But I would say that's more a plus than it is the actual, biggest, portion of your net worth and having that be your goal, right? I think your portfolio, your investments, your career and your business or whatever you want to do should be a large portion of your wealth. And I don't necessarily think being completely tied up in your home and being house poor is the greatest look. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to be renting. And if you look at some of the numbers, investing the difference between that and what you would pay with mortgage and home ownership costs, you actually end up coming out ahead in a lot of scenarios. And so if you want to, instead of getting a home when you're 25, you wait until your early 30s when you're settling down, maybe you're starting a family, things like that, or early to mid 30s. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. And that's the sort of position where you're in anyway, because the costs are much higher. So, maybe waiting until you have a lot more disposable income and you have that financial base to actually withstand home ownership, because any homeowner will tell you it's a lot of money to be a homeowner, and things just happen that you have no idea. There's a new roof, or your bathtub breaks, or who knows? And you need to be able to withstand those costs without, leaning into debt, which we sort of talked about early on. So I could go on and on about this, but ultimately, it's very important that you feel like you're very strongly financially well off. You don't need to be rich, but you have a good base before you end up becoming a homeowner, in my opinion.
I think you're right in that equity in your home it's not a guarantee anymore. Like you say, in our grandparents' day, you could buy something for which was expensive at the time, but now the values have grown so much over the last few decades that there's so much equity now in these properties. But with the housing market being what it is these days, that equity or the buildup of equity is not always guaranteed, or at least not to the substantial amount that generations before us experienced. And so I agree with you that having that as your last sort of plan or one and only plan is maybe not the right strategy where you can diversify with your other investments, like you say, and being able to just manage your expenses. Like you say, renting is not a bad thing. And I agree with that as well. If you can afford where you're living and you are comfortable, you're not having to maintain that property. That's the landlord's responsibility. So as long as you are taking care of it, any kind of those things that break down, that's the landlord's cost that covers that, which is a benefit for you. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Now we only have a minute left. And so for those who want to reach out to you, want to listen to your podcast, follow you on social media, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm New Money Nate across everything. I'm on Instagram. I'm Nate New Money. And so if you want to go on Instagram and shoot me a message, I try to respond to every single one. Just shoot me a DM, say, hey, listen to the show. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Nathan Kennedy. And then the podcast is the New Money with Nate Kennedy. So you can check that out as well. But always happy to take any questions and help out where I can.
Well, Nate, thank you so much for being here. And I really appreciate your advice for all of our viewers. And I also want to thank you, our viewers, for watching. Until next time, I'm Shannon Jackson.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
This is a perfectly healthy child.